Right, Nigel and Ratu.
Iba.
Nigel and Ratu, Zabitzek. Pugagi Estagi. Right, Hungan Gaigigi YouTube. Gaigigi
Iba.
Instagram. Gaigigi Facebook. Oh, Enigisi Underwood Lokwe. Hungan. All right. Oh, Biba Hungan. Oh, Enigisi Victoria Lokwe.
Wow.
All right.
Iba.
Happening, dispensive, I'm running from meeting to meeting.
No, Tazuga, Tazuga. Paratatutun Pogo. We are just about to get started right now. All right. Hafade todo samzu gwena hudzung estigi un nuevo na episode Fanatsu. Wai host Mizu. Lo, we don't really want to hear from me today because the Zoom room is filled with amazing people who all testified last month about Bill 242-38. If you are not familiar with Bill 242-38, hey, Huffabee Dadamo, what are you doing? What are you doing? I debut and Tai Moss Nagi News. Your algorithm must be all about cats or bush cutters or something else. Bill 242-38 eliminates the right to Chamorro self-determination in a future plebiscite for Guam. And so when the hearing was held last month, more than 150 people attended, more than 100 people signed up to testify. 40 plus people were able to testify over 7 hours. The overwhelming majority opposing eliminating the right to Chamorro self-determination, having a vote in which the Chamorro people are able to express freely and fairly what they want for the political future of their island, this long denied chance to express what they want for the future of their island. And another public hearing is planned in the future because, as I said, the majority of the people who came asking to testify were not able to be heard that day. And so one of the things that came up was, of course, from the person who sponsored this, Senator Will Parkinson, was, well, where do we go from here? What happens if he is proposing Bill 242-38 to move ahead this process that has been stalled because of the Davis case, because of federal unconstitutional issues, federal courts, and so on? What do we do to move this process ahead? And across the 7 hours, many people talked from different perspectives, sharing their emotions, sharing their plans, sharing their feelings, sharing the hard work that they have done on this issue. And we have three voices who shared their perspective, sharing their ideas, and also talking about why Bill 242 is really insufficient in so many ways. If you want to think about decolonizing this island, if you want to think about justice, if you want to think about really moving ahead, Bill 242 is tinahong ano. Tinahong. Certainly not enough to feed your family. Certainly not enough. It's not even the finadeni. It's not even the doni. It's not even enough. And so we have with us here Dr. Robert Underwood, who was the first to testify, and then we have with us Victoria Lola Leon Guerrero, who testified sort of in this. Were you in the first or the second panel, the second wave? Hungan, the first wave, who went soon after Dr. Robert Underwood, and then we have Ed Leon Guerrero Pulan speaks, who went later. I gave up my seat so he could go earlier than me, because I think I testified in like the last hour. And so for this here, I want us to talk about, I want you to share what you shared, of course, but I also want us to think about, beyond Bill 242. Because one of my frustrations was the simple idea that this fixes anything. Bill 242 fixes this, solves this, moves this ahead, and that was really my frustration. And so, Senor, I want to pass it off. Hago Finetna. Hagui mas amku, hagui mas menhalum guini, hagui mas amku, mas atmam, gi estina y tenta, pues hagu por favor, hafe y hinasomo por esti, hafe y finadzimu giesti.
Si dos masi miget na zan todos hamzo ni mane kungok za mane ega pago na bunitun haani. It was an amazing outpouring and a very invigorating outpouring of sentiment, demonstrating the depth, I think, of emotion that is attached to this. And always try to kind of outline, especially to people who are holding political office and who are officials, that activists are the conscience of the society. They are the conscience, that this is really your conscience speaking to you. And sometimes your conscience is very, very loud. And sometimes the conscience doesn't turn into the same words, but your conscience is speaking to you. And then, of course, you have older people who are not as vociferous, but their wisdom should come through to you. So I think it is now kind of an established fact or reality, I wouldn't say fact, a reality that this bill will not make it into public law, may not make it out of committee, may make it into committee. The only way that this bill doesn't make it into the committee is if the sponsor withdraws it, which I think was which I suggested as part of my rejoinder to his comments. If you withdraw it, maybe we can start talking about it in a more serious and enlightened way. The issue then remains what happens next. And first of all, we have to make sure that the bill doesn't go anywhere. So I heartily encourage everyone to continue to not just speak out, but to call offices, to call senatorial offices and ask them for a clear statement on where they stand on this ill-timed, obnoxious piece of legislation, and just ask them where they stand on it. And if I had property near the Guam Legislature, I would put up a big billboard, a scorecard. What we need is a scorecard, a big scorecard, so that people going to work at the legislature can't help but look at it. And that scoreboard says for Chamorro self-determination, against Chamorro self-determination, and then we insert the names of legislators into that as they make their statements known. I think that's the Chamorro self-determination scoreboard. And I don't know how many points the opponents will score, but I'm pretty sure that those in favor of Chamorro self-determination are going to score more runs. So, I'll leave it up to the imagination of people who are adept at social media and graphics as to how that scoreboard looks. But that scoreboard has to be specific in terms of names of senators, because this has been put in front of them. It's not us calling them out. It's actually Senator Parkinson calling them out. And we have to kind of imagine it that way. It is Senator Parkinson that has put the bill in front of people, and now it's up to the duly elected officials of Guam and the Guam Legislature to make their sentiments known. Going forward, I believe that this is the opportune time for really strong group conversations connecting self-determination to the issue of decolonization, not just kind of emotionally or intellectually, but in real terms. And so now people will start to think about their political status options in those terms. And of course, we will see that there will be people who will continue to say that this is illegitimate, or that it cannot be carried out, or that it, or maybe they'll suggest some clever way of carrying out. I don't discount that. I've always felt that if the government of Guam called an election and said, we really intend only for the Chamorro people to show up, and vote, that in the main, only Chamorros would show up. I don't think very many other people will show up. And I'll use this example from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs, the voting for it, which was killed by Rice versus Cayetano, but in the voting for that, previous to that Supreme Court decision, was limited to Hawaiians. So they had a general election. You would go into the voting in Hawaii, and then you would ask to a ballot for OHA, Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and then they would ask you, "Are you Native Hawaiian?" And then they would affirm it, and then they would get the ballot. Now, I asked people who actually carried that out, how many non-Hawaiians actually got the ballot or asked for the ballot? Says very rarely, but there were always some who insisted, like, I'm Hawaiian in spirit, or I'm a Hawaiian sympathizer or something. But in the main, that was implemented in a way in which the general community understood the importance of that and bought into it. I continue to have this enduring faith that the vast majority of non-Chamorros also feel that way, that they understand that. Not all. There'll obviously be some. Of course, they've already presented themselves. They've gone to court over it. And there'll always be some that will insist that this is an illegitimate exercise. But I think that in the main, most people will honor and respect that. So we have to keep the educational process going. We have to keep telling through all the various ways that we can. We have to keep telling people that this is A, legitimate. B, it's the only legitimate way to decolonize the island. And it's 3, it is connected to your political essence, your political future. And that has to be reiterated over and over and over again. Now, in the process, it'll be disappointing. There will be some Chamorros who say, I don't know whether I'm Chamorro or not, or I can't understand that argument. Oh, are there really? I don't know. And I would always tell them, I'm not going to let your confusion mess up my right to decide my future. If you're confused about who you are, then please don't mess up those people who aren't so confused. And then there'll be obviously some Chamorro who will say, oh, it's okay, in the name of democracy or being a good neighbor or whatever reason they have. But this is not about those issues. We can always be good neighbors with or without Chamorro self-determination. Being a good neighbor and nice to people and it's not dependent on whether you are in favor or opposed to Chamorro self-determination. But it is a question of justice, and it's a question of restoring that justice to our island.
No, Sidus Masi Senor, and I have to definitely endorse your idea of a sign. I feel it would improve the billboard game on Guam. The billboard game on Guam is already very lacking. I think many people find it lacking, but I think the billboard that you're calling for, I think would definitely up things a little bit. I think we have somebody who's playing without an opponent right now in terms of the billboards that he's putting out there. So I endorse. Hadzigay Tanu, Gwinigid za Hagatnya, put favor, Fanhatsa Plakatay Gwihid, Nihita Tagyasti. All right. Now, Sidus Masi, now, Victoria Halgu, I want to hand it off to you. You were in there. You were testifying, of course, representing both independent Guahan, but also you spoke on behalf of the Commission on Decolonization, also yourself. And so, and you also brought some history into it. You reminded, I think that was one of the frustrating things too, that I think all of us felt as people that have been in this, fought for this, studied this, taken this very seriously, to see a bill which was saying we're going to push this, we're going to jumpstart this, to have it lacking so much of the understanding about what has been done before and what might work, what might not work. And so I know one of the things that you were talking to me about too was the plebiscites in the past that had happened before. And so can you talk to us about what you shared and then kind of your reflections on the public hearing too?
Sure. Yeah, this, the way you described it kind of reminded me of how when Dr. Underwood was in Congress and he said every time there were new congressional representatives, it's like he had to continue to keep reorienting them to Guam's World War II experience and the need for war reparations. So on this like local level, I feel like every time this issue comes up in the legislature, I'm always reminded that there's so little actually known, even by our own leaders, about the movement for self-determination, the intention, the injustice, all of this. And it becomes really clear whenever these kinds of measures occur. And so I think for me, what was really evident is that we really need to better document our history and make that accessible because every new slate of legislators should be fully aware of the history of the place that they're serving. And we could see that day that that is not the case, especially on this issue. And so Senator Parkinson opened up with a version of his understanding of the UN and international laws that guide the decolonization process. And sort of the claim that what Guam hopes to do has never been done before. But those of us who've studied this know that's not really the case. And it was also because of his loose interpretation of what the law is actually calling on, right? So Dr. Underwood accurately pointed out because, Parkinson was claiming that there's no ancestry-based, election in any other place in the world has occurred, or that what Guam is asking for to not provide universal suffrage is nothing that's been done anywhere else in the world. And so Dr. Underwood points out, actually, this is happening in New Caledonia and there are other places, right? And then I wanted to point out, and I thankfully eventually did, that most places decolonized immediately and right after the creation of the United Nations, and during a time when their population hadn't been, as Ricardo Bordalio says in his autobiography, diluted. And other activists have said this over time, that the US has completely changed the population of Guam, making it so that Chamorros are more and more minorities in our homeland, and harder and harder for it to be a vote that truly assesses what the colonized people of our island want. And so his, sort of limited or narrow interpretation of the law loses sight of the fact that when you actually look at the law, it isn't an ancestry-based determination. It's still a political one. It's still based on, the Organic Act, the most recent colonizing action, right? So the people who can vote currently, according to the law, are those who were made citizens by the signing of the Organic Act and their descendants. And so this isn't based on ancestry, it's based on a political action. And in that sense, that has been done before. And so kind of pointing that out was really important. Another thing that seemed to really be unclear for senators was whether or not like a constitution was the solution. And so not even sort of, and wanting to break down the history of past attempts at constitutional conventions and what made them fail. Or past plebiscites. So Parkinson opens up talking about a plebiscite that took place in 1982 and saying it was a plebiscite that allowed for universal suffrage, so everybody participated in it. But that plebiscite was protested by the Organization of People for Indigenous Rights because it opened the vote up to everybody, and it had ended up becoming the lowest voter turnout in Guam's history at that time because people protested it. It did end up leading, I know, to the drafting of the Commonwealth Act, which of course fails in Congress. And so another point that I ended up making to Parkinson was the fact that just because you allow for universal suffrage or follow Congress's rules doesn't mean Congress is going to respect the wishes of the people. And so the idea here is, who, what rule book are we following and why? And what do we think that it like allows us, or what do we think it's going to guarantee? And we can see not just in the case of Guahan, but even in the case of Puerto Rico, like universal suffrage doesn't mean Congress is going to side with you. And so thinking that this is going to expedite things, or thinking that this bill is going to save Guam, the reality is, at the end of the day, unfortunately, it still goes to Congress, and Congress historically has not honored the will of the people, right? The failure of the Commonwealth Act was that they couldn't agree with Guam on key components, right? Namely, like our sovereignty and the ability for us to make decisions about our land, things that are really important to us as a people. And so that was one thing. I think he started off just really trying, particularly to get Dr. Underwood to agree with him that what we were asking for was never done before. And then secondly, like just a really shallow and misguided understanding of the history of this movement. And so I just really want to encourage our current leaders and future leaders to really try to understand, especially when you take on a measure like this, the history behind it. How do you do that? Bring people in, right? The activists who have been fighting for this for generations, many of them were in the room, would happily sit down with senators and provide that information. It was also pointed out repeatedly by those who had attended Senator Parkinson's town halls that many of these things were raised in those community town halls, which people went out of their way to attend and provide testimony at, spoke with courage at, and it didn't make a difference. And his bill completely ignored what was expressed in these town halls. And so I think, you got to ask yourself, if you're going to do something like hold community events to ascertain the will of the people, but then you completely don't listen to them, then what was the point, right? We don't want to keep going down that road. But you also asked like what I testified about. It was really just, trying to represent the Commission on Decolonization's position that this is a right that should be reserved for the colonized people of Guahan. It went through the history of that and why that right is important. And then basically I answered a lot of questions about the Constitution, which I know comes up a lot. And so I think I will talk about it a little bit here. If Guam were to draft a constitution and present it to U.S. Congress as an unincorporated territory, it would basically permanize that role, and it would be an action partaken by the people and seen as an act of decolonization. And so in the past two attempts, and the second one was protested as well by OPIR, the issue is that a constitution submitted by a territory of the United States would have to affirm US sovereignty over that territory, and by default does not resolve our political status issue or decolonize our community. And so the intention of protesting that on, when the last endeavor was that we should first exercise self-determination, determine what is the preferred political status option, and then design a constitution for that, as opposed to taking this clear act of self-determination in terms of drafting a constitution and being bound by the parameters of our current political status.
No, Sidus Mossing. It's really, I think the bringing up the Constitution is always important because politicians, it's kind of like it's one of our zombie sort of things. They talk about like zombie laws and zombie bills. In politics, it's these things that always come back because they die, and then somebody says, hey, you know what? We should try this. And then everyone's like, no, we tried that. It fails. It sucks. But people come and say, hey, this will solve all our problems. And then they try to resurrect it and bring it back to life. And the Constitution is one of those things where every time somebody comes into the political status discussion and they don't know anything about it, and they think, well, we should just write a constitution. That seems to make sense. But they don't know the history. They don't know, they're not thinking about the wider issues, and they just think about that. But it's so frustrating.
I think
Because,
the other thing too was Ken Leon Guerrero sort of, because it's related to this, right? Sort of this claim that the Guam Congress walk out and then the subsequent,
oh,
passage of the Organic Act was Guam's most recent act of self-determination. So it's another
oh,
similar dilemma where um, people are attempting a route to seek more rights or to seek citizenship or to seek equal rights within our current status is not necessarily, but it doesn't actually equate self-determination in a sense that we did not draft the Organic Act. We did not sign the Organic Act, right? And the Organic Act was really designed to still give federal control over the island. And so, Ken Leon Guerrero proclaimed that all of us in the room were spitting on our ancestors because we are ignoring the fact that they walked out and they fought for the Organic Act. Well, they weren't fighting for the Organic Act. They were trying to work within what was given to them at the time. And at the time, they thought that's U.S. citizenship was a route to get the rights that they were being denied.
oh yeah.
It didn't proclaim that this was an act of decolonization, so it's a real skewed version of history.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and it's not an act of self-determination.
You cannot take anything seriously that he says, because he claims that we have been self-governing since 1898.
Mm.
And just that simple fact alone means that yeah, you shouldn't take seriously anything that he says, because why would you even, I mean, it's one thing if you wanted to try to claim since 1950 we have had limited self-government, but 1898, you have to be like, I mean, you have to be living inside of ChatGPT to think that like we have been self-governing since the naval government.
If I could add, just to validate what Lola has pointed out here in terms of the Constitution. When the Constitution was going to be ratified in 1979, the United States, for the first time, invited members of the United Nations to come to Guam to observe the election. The first and only time. They were operating under the assumption that if the Constitution passed, they could then make the case in front of the United Nations that Guam will now be delisted as a non-self-governing territory. So it was the only time, and we keep asking for the United Nations to come back, but of course it needs the cooperation of the U.S. government. So they brought that three representatives and a staff person by the name of Mr. Swai from Tanzania. It had the exact opposite effect intended, because those three people from the United Nations representing I believe Senegal, Trinidad, Tobago, and Syria, in conjunction with Mr. Swai, then proceeded to educate us about the decolonization process, which most of us had only a kind of a vague understanding of until that time. So by the U.S. government inviting the UN delegation coming to Guam, I, as a leading opponent of the Constitution, along with Tony Leon Guerrero, who was, has passed away, we were directly involved in conversations and trying to understand what the role of the UN could be, and that's how we actually then got energized into going and appealing to the United Nations. Had the United States not invited the UN delegation to come to Guam at that time, it might have taken a few. Of course, we would have kind of understood it eventually, but it actually jump-started OPR's involvement with the UN. So, if the United States wants to invite the UN back to observe any, we should welcome that, because it's amazing the number of things we could learn when you actually have people who are working with international law coming here and explaining to people what possibilities they have. Not necessarily that they're going to enforce them, but just having those possibilities put in front of you. That was an enormous, valuable experience for me personally, and I think for the movement at the time.
Oh, seduce masi. And I want to give a chance now to introduce the imas hobenay na membro giestinay na konversasyon. And golofan no gipaingi zanestigi si Pulan. And so
No,
Pulan speaks, por favor, songan isinangan mo.
Seduce Masi for the Kambita for the invite. And yeah, I just want to say that the words of the elders, of Senor Underwood, Dr. Underwood, also Congressman Underwood too. He was in Congress, many times. People forget that sometimes, the younger generation. And see Victoria Loliangura, they've said amazing testimonies, amazing words, and it turned out that this public hearing, it turned into an educational event for the senators there. And citizen Will Parkinson, I consider him a good friend, but Senator Will Parkinson, I was just inflamed and incensed. And my public testimony, it focused on what Victoria Loliang girl was talking about, which was this misunderstanding of self-determination and international law. When he kept pressing for this example, Senator Parkinson, about, oh, is there a successful example that was like a native inhabitants? And so that was why in my public testimony, I specifically gave the successful example, which was South Sudan, which they had a self-determination vote, and this was in the 2000s. And the requirements for the self-determination of South Sudan exactly mirrored. It mirrored and explicitly used ethnicity ancestry in its requirements to be eligible, and that was a UN approved, that was a UN sanctioned, UN approved, and now South Sudan is one of the youngest countries in the world. It's a UN member by all means, and that was an example right there. Furthermore, this idea that the indigenous in self-determination, it's supposed to be all people, as Senator Parkinson claimed, is completely wrong. And just to give an example, and this is actually the example that Senator Parkinson gave, is that he cited this judge in an ICJ International, the Court of Justice advisory opinion concerning West Sahara. He stated this, and he even posted it on Facebook, unless he deleted it. But he stated that this judge stated that it's for all people. It turns out I read that entire opinion. Nowhere does it say that. Not one place does it say it's the all people of self-determination. For nothing. It was a fake, made-up quote. And in fact, numerous times in that ICJ opinion concerning West Sahara, it actually stated it was the indigenous people that have the rights of self-determination, backed by multiple UN resolutions, and even named it, if it's not clear, it even named the Sawai, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, Sawai people as the indigenous people who have the rights of self-determination in West Sahara. So his own example flies against them. So that's why it's very important that I think that senators, when they go, and even with the public, when they go into these issues, that I think they need to speak to the actual experts on these issues. We have someone here, Dr. Underwood, who was there during the time of the Constitution. Para, he was one of their spokesmen, a big organizer he knew what he was there in Congress. Of course, Dr. Underwood knows about the issues and the intricacies of it. So yes, that was why my testimony was focused on more of like a fact-finding education mission, rather than and also that this idea that the Davis v. Guam case, right, that therefore the solution is a simple legislative fix to all eligible voters is just completely mind-baffling, because it doesn't have to be that. And in the decision of Davis v. Guam, right, it never stated that you completely revert to a 30-day everyone, all residents could vote, because it only does a permanent enjoyment of the section in the law that that concerned native inhabitants. You know, it never stated to completely eliminate everything to a 30-day, pretty much all residents of Guam vote. So yeah, so that was that was my take on this. It was a very seemingly a lack of deep understanding of the issue that only from speaking to people who have extensive experience concerning self-determination, like the activists, like the people who actually were caring about this issue for decades. Speak to them about the issue, instead of using Chat GPT or to tell you the issue. So yeah, that's my quick take on this.
C'est juste Marcy Poulan. And I think it was really unfortunate because some of the quotes that he was using, and even in some of his media statements and social media statements ahead, they were out of context. He was using UN stuff from that was referencing just general voting, not decolonization voting. And sometimes people like Paul Zerzan have done, or Ken Leongoro have also done that too. In their stuff, they just Google or ask ChatGPT and it'll just tell them that, of course, everyone is supposed to be able to vote. Voting is important. Never, never making the distinction that is voting for self-determination, voting for the cause of justice, repairing a wrong. Is that supposed to be like voting for your mayor, your governor, your senator? And then also forgetting, as each of you have reminded us, that even within the United Nations, sort of voting for self-determination has its own trajectory. That most votes happened in places where, and people asked me throughout the day for the hearing when Parkinson and others kept saying that no one has ever had a vote like Guam. This is racist, and this is the most racist thing ever, you know. And it's like, no, there's, the world is complicated, and do you want to know why it is the way it is? As people have said, in most cases, when these votes happened, the population was the colonized people. And the population that was not colonized was very small, and they didn't care to vote. They didn't want to vote. They left. They didn't participate. They had no vested interest in staying behind. There was no need for them. So there was no procedure to distinguish them because the British colonials didn't want to stay. They didn't want to participate. Or as Underwood was suggesting, if they did participate, they were minuscule in it. And so, but the United Nations had resolutions and these are the most important ones for Guam. And these were the ones which the United States completely ignored in the case of Guam. There was resolutions which said that you are not to allow unchecked immigration into your non-self-governing territories, and you are not to militarize your non-self-governing territories. And the United States completely ignored those. And so that was one thing that was always supposed to be maintained in order to protect the colonized people. But because of places such as Guam and then New Caledonia as well, in which colonial powers, administering powers ignored those and allowed, whether because they wanted to influence the fate of the colonies, their political future, or because they didn't care. But ultimately, then it becomes a question of, well, what is the voice of the colonized? Can they finally get a chance to speak and express themselves? And so part of the problem, though, as what Poulan was saying, is that within the United States, there is no body of law that recognizes this. There's Native American law, there's constitutional law, there's election law. And then even in the case of Davis, there was the attempt by Julian Uggan to introduce international law, which has a lot on this. And the federal courts resisted bringing in international law to deal with this because they did not want to set a precedent. And the U.S. federal courts don't like to bring in international law to deal with these sorts of issues. And so, Senor? Hungan?
Yes, well, the important part of this also is to explain to people that each and every instance where a political future is being selected, a process of decolonization, in almost each and every instance, if they're following the UN, they're not following just one UN decision. They're actually, in most instances, tailoring the resolution of that particular country, whether it's West Sahara or South Sudan or East Timor, in relationship to its own history, in relationship to the continent. It's the same thing even in New Caledonia, where they're trying to find a formula that takes care of that. It's in respect for its own unique history in New Caledonia. So it's not a kind of a mindless and even the Guam definition, using the Organic Act definition, is not really ethnically based. It is really based upon a political class of people, which the US government itself identified as the group of people that were, in fact, being given additional civil and political rights. So, what the same logic must apply in seeking decolonization. You identify the same people, and the US government gave the people of Guam that definition. It wasn't one that we came up with. So even that context. So, we're not dealing with blood quantum or ancestry per se. Now, of course, in a general way we are, but in reality, it's a political process, and the political process must be devoted to the underlying concerns of justice and bringing closure to a history of colonization, which has gone on for many centuries. So that in itself, so it's not like reasonable people can't sit down and say, look, this is what happened here. This is how you resolve it. And this is the avenue. And how do we get behind that? And I think if we do that, then that gets us closer to justice.
Yeah, I think what you point at as well is like, do you just do something to do it, or are you doing it because you actually believe in what needs to be done? So in this case, it felt like, because a lot of people and other senators as well were saying, well, Senator Parkinson is coming from a really good place. He really sees himself as trying to push this issue forward, that the Davis case stalled it, sorry. And the reason it stalled is because of who votes. So it's like, well, let's open it up to everybody and let this happen because it needs to happen. Well, that's not always the best thing to do, because in letting it happen because it needs to happen, you're just further harming the people that the entire thing was meant for. So, this is like the important thing that we as people, and especially our leaders, need to ask themselves. Why do you do something? And if you can't answer that, other than just, oh, I'm doing it because it's the only way, well, then, you're not actually really thinking about the action sincerely. And in our case, yes, any attempt that government has at doing, a plebiscite according to the law as it stands is subject to potential lawsuits, right? We will continue hitting this wall. But the reality is that we then need to figure out, how do we work outside of that, right? So there is the option of, maybe it's not a government-led plebiscite. There have been and there is precedent for NGO-led plebiscites. There is precedent for working more closely with the United Nations. There's ways that we as a community can come together to make this happen in a way that is just, right? That is right and that is just. Because US law doesn't even define us as Indigenous people, period. And the same way that you're describing the nuance of international law and how each unique place and their unique history influences that, in the case of US law, our unique status and our unique history sadly is not interpreted in these courts, and these courts don't work in our favor because we are not like anything that's happened before. And this particular justice is not one that has been laid out, in the US court system in a way that's going to really actually lead to justice. So I feel like it's either not working, either we work as a community and try to have an NGO-led plebiscite, or we work with Congress to more appropriately define who the indigenous people of Guahan are by law and what rights we are entitled to, and what, justice still needs to occur in terms of resolving the issue of self-determination. But to just kind of throw your hands in the air and be like, I'm the only one brave enough to do this, and I know no one's going to like me, but I'm here and I'm doing it. It's like, no, you can't just do something in that way. It becomes very shallow and actually very, very harmful.
Yeah, I think no, there is kind of a misrecognition and a misunderstanding of what Guam is to the United States. There's no roadmap, and it goes to what Underwood was saying, that the uniqueness of the situation. So if Guam can do everything right, according to what a federal court says, according to what the Department of Justice says, according to what this subcommittee of the Natural Resources Committee says, and nothing happens. And because 2 years from now, Congress changes, 4 years from now, a new president comes in, and then 10 years from now, it's a completely different Super Bowl halftime show, and America completely changes. And nothing happens because there's no roadmap, because America doesn't have any reckoning for its colonies in general. There's no legacy for that. There's no way to initiate that conversation over what is your responsibility for your colonies. Where do we go? It's almost 100 years since Dr. Ramon Manalisay Sablan asked, "Are we fish or are we fowl? What are we to you?" And so America is no closer to that question than it was when the first petition went over in 1901, with Chamorro's asking for civilian rights, defined a permanent government. And so, and that's what's difficult then when we think about a bill like this, is that a bill that Parkinson has put forth is really based on this idea, well, a court has told us what's bad, and so we just need to do this and then we'll get closer. But it doesn't work like that.
And that's not how you solve an injustice. So the basic question goes back to whether Senator Parkinson and other supporters believe there has been a grave injustice. If there has been a grave injustice, then how do we gather together to develop a strategy to resolve that injustice? Not to just go with it, not to just allow it to continue on, which is what is happening in this course of events. Is that now, if you don't believe that there has been injustice, and there might be some people who believe that the Chamorro people weren't colonized and that there was no injustice. Well, if you really believe that, then the possibilities of conversation and resolving this grave injustice are minimal. But I believe that most people know and understand intuitively that there has been an injustice. Of course, the British colonies, even the German colonies, even the French colonies, those countries all understood that they had colonies. They had colonial offices. They had people who said, "I'm your colonial officer." And they showed up and they told you what to do. But the American system doesn't work that way because the US doesn't want to acknowledge that they have colonies. So they just kind of move along hoping nobody notices, or try to, kind of move and groove by giving some people more things and other people more things, but never really addressing the fundamental issue of self-determination for what is clearly a colony, an unincorporated owned piece of property and land that now is under U.S. management. And how do you resolve that? Now, if you and maybe that's the basic question. Do senators believe? Do the gubernatorial candidates? Do the candidates running for Congress believe that there is a grave injustice here? That the colonization is a colonialism is an injustice that must be resolved. And if they say yes, there it must be, but we resolve it by listening to Davis, well, then that's not really a solution because you're not really addressing the core issue. So I think that's fundamental. And the other part, of course, is that this is a kind of a separate issue, but the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas. Puerto Rico has a constitution. The Commonwealth has the covenant. The American Samoa has the deed of cession. Virgin Islands has, like, I think they're on their sixth attempt now to pass a constitution, so they're kind of working at that. They're working in that sort of treadmill, like a hamster or something. They're working it, but they're not getting very far. All of these territories, the political leaders believe they have some kind, and Guam and its Organic Act believe that they have some kind of special relationship with the federal government. They all believe that, when they don't all understand that, hey, we're all in the same boat. We're all unincorporated territories of the United States who are colonies and which need to go through a process of decolonization. And so, sometimes they take great umbrage at, there's people, is the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas, the sacred covenant, make that group of people qualitatively different politically and its relationship with the federal government that Guam doesn't have. I believe that it looks like that, but at the end of the day, it doesn't. And so we're all colonies in that regard. And so we have to go through that process of decolonization. And sometimes it could be tailor-made subsequently, but to understand that we're all in that relationship and that the U.S. continues to deny that they have colonies. Otherwise, they'd have a colonial office.
Yeah. Si Zeus Masi, I want to give Mas Hobanay, Mas Patgungwini a chance to speak.
Yeah,
he is seen but not heard. Ay, gay respeto, how pulan, gay respeto,
No,
so
the pulan almost turned red last night.
Go ahead and share some thoughts. We do have a few questions. Pulan, if you have something to add, we do have a few questions that have come in. So,
no, just real quick, just for all those people who are very detailed oriented, I will give you a UN committee human rights case that occurred, which directly dealt with this idea of universal suffrage, right? And this had to deal with New Caledonia, as all of us know here. There was after the Noumea Accords was passed, right, which pretty much restricted the vote to the Kanaks, the indigenous people there, and people who were there, it stopped it was like a 20-year residence to like 1991, a fixed date or something like that. Immediately after it was passed, there were about 21 French residents, right, who did not meet that requirements in New Caledonia. And so they took it up to the United Nations Human Rights Committee. It was a case called Gillett et al. V. France. You could all of you could look that up right now concerning that. And so they argue that according to the international covenants of political and civil rights, that Article 25, that they had the right to vote, because Article 25, this is human rights. This was the covenant was passed, the human rights. They have the right to vote, and they also signed in Article 26 of the Human Rights Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, that they also have freedom from discrimination. Well, it turns out that the Human Rights Court ruled against them because they stated that, hello, Article 25 has to be read in conjunction with Article 21, which clearly talks about self-determination. Hence, the right to vote, right, is not an unlimited right when it comes in the context of self-determination. So I just want to throw that little fact-finding case there, which pretty much showed that this idea that you could just cite like what Pa Zerzin, what all these other people do, where they just Google or Chat GPT these things that oh, the UN supports me because Article 25 states this. That you have to look deeper. You have to look deeper at the issue and what the court cases have actually stated in the UN, where they basically stated, hey, you obviously have to read the Article 25, the right to vote, in conjunction with a self-determination uh, plebiscite, right? So that's all I wanted to offer, because again, I'm in a room, not physically, I'm in a virtual room here of giants and this that know way more about me and who are actually there.
All right, we have a few minutes. Let's get to a few questions, but some of them Donkulo na
I just want a
question.
point of clarification. In 1982, I was just born. Dr. Underwood was there.
Yeah,
When Dr. Underwood was
dos años
testifying at the United Nations, I was but a few months old.
Yeah, and I'm on siya para New York na gadyo na sakin 2 años
Wow. Well, that makes me feel really
Pinanyanya lesa lo. Estama momoka lo pinanyanya lesa.
okay.
All right. So a question, and this is a big one though, but given the discussion of decolonization, what are the possibilities of reunification with the CNMI? This always comes up around decolonization. Senor Underwood, you talked about that the covenant and this is one of those things, is that are the CNMI has, a separate status, but more and more, I think people do realize that it is closer to Guam status. It has some features that definitely give it more authority than Guam has comparatively. But, what are some thoughts on that in terms of looking to the future?
For me, well, I'm a big fan of reunification, and the idea that we should unify under a new political status. I mean, that's the ultimate, because we can't unify under the existing. What's the point? So there's no point to it. So under some different political status, then it makes sense, because both entities are enhanced. The idea that the island should be reunified. Um, it's also important to note that seemingly most of that energy comes from Guam these days than from the Northern Marianas, and so sometimes people will critique the Northern Marianas, and the Northern Marianas, had additional benefits to their standing as a commonwealth, and they had a little bit more autonomy, and so they rightfully should be jealous of that, and so that's the status that they currently have. But at the end of the day, it's also an unincorporated territory, that if Congress saw fit to pass any law they wanted over the Northern Marianas, they might hem and haw, but they could do it. So the understanding is, to allow the entities to enter into a new political union that is different in its relationship to the United States, and is different in its relationship to each other. And I think that that becomes then an aspirational goal, like an independent Marianas, or a freely associated Marianas, maybe a state of the Marianas, but that also and be aware. And I've said that many conservative thinkers are advocating the possibility, are sort of letting loose the possibility of creating a state of the Marianas Islands as kind of part of the hedge of American power and authority in this part of the world. So there's that element as well. And that usually is coming from very conservative think tanks.
Oh, that inspires so much patriotism that
Well,
we can go
just
from
letting you
being
know.
we can be the tip of America's spear to the hedge of American power, the wall, the great
That's right.
American wall.
Yeah.
Okay, now one more.
Western Wall, as
Oh,
opposed to the southern border.
and so one more question. Have any of you, given the current administration in the United States, have you heard anything from Senator Parkinson about whether this bill would even be received, or whether the current administration has even talked about decolonization? So this person seems skeptical that, why put all this effort into pushing for this unless is there any indication that the current administration, which seems to be focused on lots of different things, that would they would they even care that we have erased the Chamorro people and their rights in the name of complying with a federal court
That's
case?
a very insightful question, because it's like you surrender something in anticipation that you're going to get something for surrendering. And in this instance, it seems like we're surrendering and we don't know who we're surrendering to, and we don't know what you're going to get for surrendering. And so that's the insight. That's a very insightful question. I haven't seen any movement like that from the Trump administration.
Not at all. And I don't think it aligns at all with what they're doing currently in the United States. So yeah.
That's so funny.
I'm also pro reunification. But of course, the important things to consider is that it's not imposed upon, but that it's something we do collaboratively. One of the things that I've heard from my relatives in Saipan is like, because Guam is bigger in terms of size and population, would it mean that like the president is always from Guahan? But we have models like in the FSM where you switch who's, which island has greater representation, every election, things like that. But I do see how, especially through the military buildup, the Marianas has been treated as one archipelago in one place. But our political division is what has really allowed the US to get away with really horrific environmental crimes and crimes against our indigenous rights to our natural resources. And we're seeing that now as well with deep sea mining. So, things that impact us impact our entire archipelago. And so if we were able to have one voice, and if we were able to be, to work collaboratively, then I think that we would be stronger and it would benefit us all. It's how we always were, so it's how we should be.
Si Zeus Masi. And Pulan, I want to give you the last word. Hunggan sa ti megay kwentos mo na giesti.
Oh, just
Then mas
sure.
megay ha ani mo nagichampo. You have the most
Yeah.
days ahead of you.
No.
You young whippersnapper who was not even born yet when Robert Underwood went to the United Nations for the first time.
Yeah, no. Let me just say, let me just thank Dr. Underwood for always fighting for what is right, even when was very unpopular back then. It's more acceptable now, but it was very unpopular back then. I'm sure he was called a communist. I'm sure he was called an anti-patriotic, whatever. But what Dr. Underwood said. It's about justice. It's about consciousness, right? And about making as much hell as you can that the legally allowed, as he stated. So, I really thank Dr. Owen for really being one of the forerunners for this. That it's carrying forward because of people like him, and also, yes, what's that, Victoria? I know you 1982. Okay, you weren't at the way back, but you're still important in the 2000s. How about that? I'll give you that one. In the interim period, the 2000s, you and Miguel, very important during that times as well, to always fighting, testifying. It's very important that we keep continuing this, having these conversations intergenerationally, right? Because then I'm learning a lot as well to move it on to forward. So I just want to say thank you to all three of you, whether you're Mus uncle or just medium uncle or Hogan.
Enigi, si Zeus Masi, Hunggan. Hungyan, si Diyos masi Pulan, si Diyos masi Senyor Danduad, si Diyos masi Victoria. Para hamsu todos ni umeegad zan umeekungok, esti finakpo estin episode Fanachu, adios, este kimanalihit.